So welcome to the first. You guys are lucky. This is the first Henny Bogan dinner, celebrating the lighter side of Mr. Hogan, and benefiting a cause that we can all get behind, which is to make Lance Barrow more famous. So Lance is a CBS coordinating producer. Produced Super Bowls, the Masters, Indy 500, I believe, the 92 Olympics, PGA Tour events, NFL playoff games, NFL regular season, and most of you know him as the star of Tin Cup, which is a story I think about a kid from Haltom City that made it all the way to be assistant producer for the U.S. Open. And I think Kevin Costner, some other people were in it maybe, but Lance was the star of it. I want to tell you what a great guy Lance is. We were outside, and I've asked Lance to do this for us, and he put his arm around me and said, I'll do anything for charity. And Judd, I can't remember what disease you have, but we're going to raise enough money tonight to cure it. So anyway, without further ado, please welcome CBS coordinator and producer for the NFL football, PGA Tour golf, star football and baseball star of Abilene Christian University, elder at his church, role model father, role model husband, world's greatest father to Caroline and Katie, illustrious movie star, member of the Texas Golf Hall of Fame, member of the Caddy Hall of Fame, Fort Worth Grace Ambassador. Lance, I can't even read all this. This is your handwriting's really hard to read.
Keep going.
Okay. Lance Barrow, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Judd. That introduction reminded me, and I hadn't told this story much, but by the way, Mayor, thank you for. I know you and David have 8,000 things to do other than be here, but thank you, Mayor. I've never met our mayor personally, but I'm honored to be here in a room with our mayor, and thank you for what you do for our community. I hear your voice at DFW about every other day, and come on, give the mayor a hand and her husband, David. Matter of fact, I hope I have a chance to go to some of those places she tells me to go to. Marty Leonard, it's an honor to always see you and be in your company. Dow Fensterwald Jr., a fellow Hall of Fame member of the Texas Golf Hall of Fame. Hunter Hawes, PGA Tour. Jim Whitten. Give Jim Whitten a hand for what he did for the tour, for Colonial Charles Schwab Challenge. Robert, it's good to see you. All the years you were here at the Hogan Foundation and what you did. But thinking about this introduction, made me think of a story Jim Nance told me once, that his hometown of Westport, Connecticut, and you got to remember Jim Nance had a lot of hometowns. He claims a lot of them, but he was living in Westport, Connecticut, and there was an auto guy owned a lot of car dealerships in the area, asked Jim to introduce the concert only for the area, only for the Westport, Connecticut residents, and it happened to be Willie Nelson. And so you got to kind of know Jim Nance. He goes to Willie. Willie's sitting in the dressing room. Jim brings him about 12 hats from CBS Sports. Willie's sitting there, and there was a guy sitting next to Willie that had his shirt unbuttoned down to his waist. And Jim said when he walked in there, he said, "Holy smokes, this guy looks like he's about to die." And Jim didn't recognize him. So he said to Willie, "How do you want to be introduced tonight, Willie? Sold over 500,000 records, have 75 number ones, 20 Grammys, 30 American Country Music Award awards, Hall of Fame writer, Hall of Fame singer. How do you want to be introduced, Willie?" And he said Willie kind of took one of his braids and looked at Jim and said, "How about, Jim, here's Willie Nelson." And he said, "Jim, I hope the people don't mind that my good friend Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones plays along with me tonight." And that was the guy that looked like he was almost dying. And you got to understand, Jim Nance didn't recognize who Keith Richards was. The other one, the other day, about probably 4 months ago, I get a call from Judd, and Judd and I eat lunch a lot, and his brother Jay. We eat lunch a lot down at Colonial, and we talk about a lot of things. And it's interesting just to hear both of them talk about their world. You know, one went to Columbia, one went to Princeton. They couldn't get into Abilene Christian, so they went to Northeast. And I was thinking about that, and Judd called me up. Usually I text him and say, hey, what are we doing for lunch? But Judd called me up out of the blue and said, I got something to ask you. And I said, okay. And he sounded very serious about it. He says, as an American citizen, what do you cherish the most? And I thought, well, that's a crazy question. I've been with you 1,000 times. You never asked me that question. I said, I don't understand really why you're asking me that. But he goes, no, I'm serious. As an American citizen, what do you cherish the most? And he's a lawyer, so I figured, you know, and he went to Princeton, so I figured there's got to be something going on here, that he's doing a research or he's studying something. So I said, well, give me a second. I said, well, it's pretty easy, Judd. Freedom of speech. Free speech. He goes, that's wonderful. Sometime in the middle of June, you'll be in Shady Oaks and you'll give us a free speech for the Ben Hogan Foundation. So it's good to be here with you, Judd. And I noticed Josie and you were talking while I was telling that story. You want me to tell that again where you understand what I was saying?
Is everybody here in the mic with
Mike. No. Mike, switch mic. Let me switch mics. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes.
I'm a very low talker and very soft spoker. Speaking of it, so I hope you can hear me. I don't like to really talk very loud.
All right, so Lance, this one keeps cutting out. Okay. So Lance, how do we go from being, you grew up on a dairy farm in Haltom City. How do we go from there to Augusta National?
Well, you get on I-20 and you just go east. When I was a kid growing up, I grew up on a dairy farm. There was a guy from Texas, Midland, Texas. Some of y'all might know him, Terry Jastrow. He played golf at the University of Texas with Krishan Kite, and he was a whiz kid for ABC Sports. And when I was a kid growing up, I loved sports. I played sports. I would read an article every time Byron Nelson tournament was in Dallas, and every time Colonial was in May, I would read this article about this whiz kid producer, and I thought, well, this sounds like the greatest job in the world. And I used to notice when I would go to Colonial, and I actually caddied in the Colonial when I was in high school. During a tournament, my parents had a rule that if I made good grades, I'd miss a week of school at Fort Worth Christian, and I would be able to caddy, and I caddied for Hale Irwin when he was a rookie and a few other notable golfers. And I would notice all these young people running around Colonial working for ABC Sports. So my senior year of high school, the guy I was caddying for missed the cut. And so I thought Saturday morning, as an 18-year-old, I'd go out to Colonial and ask ABC Sports if I could work for them like anybody would for a major network at 18. So I went up and they told me who to talk to. And I went up and I said, I'm Lance Barrow. I'd like to work for you guys this weekend. And the guy looked at me and said, you ever worked for us before? And now my mom's voice came into my head about, you better tell the truth always, son. And I was about to graduate from Fort Worth Christian. And I thought for a second and I said, yes, I worked for you guys before. And he said, have you ever done lower third graphics? And I was about to go off to Abilene Christian, play football and baseball. You know, you sign a document at Abilene Christian that you'd lived a Christian life and make sure you don't miss curfew or any of that stuff. And my grandmother's voice came into my head and said, you always tell the truth. Because if they find out you're lying, it's going to be worse if you'd have just told the truth. And I said, yes, sir, I've done lower third graphics. So he let me work. And afterwards, he said, you did a great job. Anytime you want to work for us, give us a call. So I went off to college, played football and baseball at Abilene. I actually caddied on the PGA Tour for a couple years for a guy named Jim Simons, who almost won the U.S. Open as an amateur, who played golf at Wake Forest with Lanny Watkins and Curtis Strange and Jay Haas. And my junior year of college, I was working at the Barrow for ABC. And a friend of mine here in Fort Worth, Jim Eagle Jr., which a lot of y'all know, said to me, you know, CBS is looking for people to work next week at Colonial. You should go by and see if they need somebody. So I went out there Monday morning, just like I did 3 years earlier. There was a guy sitting in a golf cart, never looked at me, a gentleman named Chuck Will, who was the right-hand person for the legendary producer Frank Chikinian, who created Golf TV. And I said, Mr. Will, I'd like to work for you this week. He said, come back Thursday, and I'll give you something to do. So I walked in Thursday morning. He said, the guy that usually works for Pat Summerall is a Canadian, and he's getting ready for the 76 Olympics in Montreal, and he's working for the CBC. So the guy that usually works for Pat Summerall is this guy. So he's not going to be here, so I'm going to put you on the 18th tower, and you're going to work for Pat Summerall this week. And he says, the reason I'm doing that, kid, is because Pat's a Southerner, you're a Southerner. Pat played football. I hear you play football now in college, and you're a big guy and the wind blows hard here in Fort Worth. You'll keep the 18th tower from blowing away. So now I'm thinking, I'm 19 years old. I just got out of my junior year of college. I'm going to walk, you know, where we still park our trucks at Colonial at 15. And you walk across the fairway at 15. You go around the 16th green, the 17th tee box. And I'm heading to the tower at 18, behind the green at 18. And I'm scared to death. 1976, I'm 19 years old. I'm going to work for the legendary Pat Summerall. And then I realized sitting next to Pat is the 1964 United States Open champion, the legendary Ken Venturi. And I am scared to death. So I get up on the tower, I'm sitting there, what am I going to say to Pat Summerall? What am I going to do when he walks up here? So finally he shows up, and he looked like a giant to me. And I got up and I said, Mr. Summerall, I'm Lance Barrow. I'm going to work for you this week. Is there anything you want to tell me, any advice you want to give me? And if you remember, before he worked with John Madden for all these years, his partner in football was Tom Brookshire. And Tom Brookshire always said, if someone was going to tell me I'm dying, I'd want Pat Summerall to tell me, because it's going to sound better coming out of his voice than anybody else's voice. So I said, Mr. Summerall, I'm Lance Barrow. I'm going to work for you. Any advice, anything you want to tell me? And he said to me, don't get excited. Don't call me Mr. Summerall. And hand me a beer out of that cooler. And that's what started my career. I ended up traveling everywhere he went, all over the world for 6 years, and then moved to New York and started our entry-level program in 1982, and then took over golf and football for about 30 years before I kind of semi-retired a couple of years ago. I was the only second person in the history of our network who ever had the job as in charge of golf, and I was only the second person in the history of television who has ever produced the Masters, and also the only person in network TV who had the responsibility of 2 major sports at one time. I don't know how big a deal that is, but that's, you know, just to kind of tell you that you're not wasting a couple of hours sitting here. I mean, at least give Austin and all the people at Shady Oak a hand. How great a meal was this tonight?
So Lance, I've always been fascinated by, you and I are noted teetotalers, let's call it that, but you've worked around a lot of what we call noted drinkers.
Yeah, alcoholics.
Yeah, okay. And I don't think Pat would mind some stories about how he would partake in the booth a little bit.
Yeah, Pat Summerall Ken Venturi, and a lot of them, they drank a lot. A lot of people know the story what Pat went through. He was laying on his deathbed and got a new liver and lived the last 12, 15 years of his life, still telling the stories that he always did, but also telling, about drinking, and never judged anyone, never talked about it to anyone. But he was an unbelievable man. I remember walking out that day, and Chuck Wills said to me, "Son, you're not going to meet a guy like Pat Summerall in this business very often." And that was May of 1976, and I still have not met a person like him, because he was an unbelievable person and an unbelievable guy. One of my greatest thrills in my life, it was a sad thrill, but his family asked John Madden and myself to be the only non-family members to speak at his funeral when he passed away over in Dallas, and that was a huge honor. But I remember two stories. Many years ago, when we do football now, like when Jim Nance and Tony Romo does football, when I did football with Jim Nance, first was Dick Enberg and Dan Dierdorf, and then Jim Nance and Phil Simms. What we normally do, we're doing a Cowboy game. We will come in on Thursday night. We will get up early Friday morning, go to the Cowboys, and we would spend all day long with the Cowboys. We watch practice. We watch about a couple hours of film, and then we'd sit down with the head coach, maybe sometime the coordinator, and about 6 players. Then Friday night, we'd have a dinner with all the announcers and all the production people. And then Saturday morning, go to the stadium. Saturday afternoon, go to the visiting team hotel, do the same thing. Go Saturday night, have a production meeting with the announcers, go over everything we're going to do, and then go do the game, and then start over again. But back in the days of Pat Summerall and Tom Brookshire, they'd show up Saturday afternoon, and you'd meet them in the bar. And they'd start drinking, and then you'd go to dinner, they'd drink, and then we'd go do the game. Except one game every year, they would do the Sun Bowl in El Paso. And they'd be in El Paso for the whole week. And I firmly believe they had no clue who was in the game until we got to the stadium the day of the game. So this one year, it was the University of Maryland with Randy White. They were 11-0. They had the legendary coach Jerry Claiborne, and they were upset that they didn't get to go to the Cotton Bowl or the Sugar Bowl. And this is before they had 15 bowl games on New Year's Day. And they were going to prove to the world that the ACC was more than basketball. And they played the University of Texas, who was 6-5 at the time, could care less about being in El Paso. And they outweighed Texas about 40 to 50 pounds on the offense and defensive line. And we thought this is going to be one of the greatest blowouts of all time. And the game always started El Paso time at 10 o'clock in the morning. But if you remember, Texas had these 4 guys on their team: Johnny Ham Jones, Johnny Jam Jones, Johnny Ram Jones, and Johnny Jam Jones. And Todd Dodge, the legendary high school football coach at South Lake and now down in Austin, was the quarterback. So Maryland kicks off to Texas, kicks it in the end zone. They bring it out on the 20-yard line. You look down on the field, Maryland's in these 4-point stance, wide tackle 6, and they look like giants compared to Texas. First play of the game, Todd Dodge pitches the ball out to Johnny Lamb Jones. He turns the corner and goes 80 yards down the field, and he holds the ball up when he crosses the goal line. You look back down on the field, Maryland is still in their stance. And you can imagine in this day and age what happened next. Tom Brookshire looks at Pat on air and said, "Patrick, bring on the Bloody Marys, boys. It's going to be a long day." Now we'd all get fired for that, And I remember when they broke Pat Summerall and Tom Brookshire up and put Pat with John Madden, they asked Pat at the first press conference, because Brookie and Pat were like brothers. They said, "How much are you going to miss Tom Brookshire Sunday afternoon, Pat?" And Pat looked at the press corps and said, "I won't miss him at all Sunday, but I'll sure miss him Saturday night." And it was some deal. The other one, I usually tell it when when we get into, mistakes we made, back in the old days, like now at Pebble Beach, our unofficial host is Clint Eastwood. And he comes up on the tower, and, I just, back in the day, used to love and put the key down and said, hello, Mayor, or hello, Clint. And just to hear him go, hello, Lance. You feel lucky today, punk. But just to hear him say that, it was unbelievable. But back in the day, we never did the tournament with Bing Crosby because he had already passed away. But his best friend in life became our unofficial host, which was a legendary actor, Phil Harris. And most people have no clue who Phil Harris is, but he was the voice of Baloo in Jungle Book. So now everybody knows who he is. And I used to tell stories all the time that Pat, Ken Venturi, and Phil Harris would get up in the morning and start drinking. Sober up, start drinking again. Sober up, go to dinner, drink, go to bed. So one day we go on the air, and Pat Summerall says, I'm here on the 18th hole here at the legendary Pebble Beach Golf Links. I'm with the 1964 U.S. Open champion, the 1961 Bing Crosby Pebble Beach Pro-Am champion, the man who got called by Bing Crosby when he was at college at San Jose State, Ken Venturi. And Ken, what a great day to come back, and what a beautiful weather, and it's got to bring back a lot of memories for you. And Ken answers a question. Well, now we're here with our host, the legendary Phil Harris. And Phil, when you look around this area and you see this tournament, you see what's happened, it's got to really make you miss Bing, and you got to wish that he's here. And he goes, Patrick, Kenny, man, I miss Bing. I miss him so much. Matter of fact, last night I was laying in bed at the lodge, not far from where we're sitting. And for some reason, and I don't know why, I opened the drawer next to my bed, and there was a Gideon Bible in the drawer. And I'm thinking, all right, for some reason I opened up the Gideon Bible. And on the first page of the Gideon Bible, there was a handwritten note that said, if you have a drinking problem, call this number. And I'm thinking, well, maybe Bing has given us a sign. Maybe he's thinking we're drinking a little bit too much, Pat and Kenny. And I didn't know what to do, so I did what I thought that maybe this sign was giving me. I ended up calling that number. And this was on national TV. Pat and Kenny, you know what it was? It was a liquor store. And the other story, the one, it's same thing. We come on the air, Bing Crosby, da-da-da-da-da. And he says, yeah, one of the last trips we ever took together was we went to the Jack Daniels plant. And I walked into the plant with Bing Crosby, and Pat and Kenny, you know what he said? He said, holy smokes, look at this, Phil. They're making this stuff faster than you can drink it. And he said, yeah, I know, Bing, but I got them working nights. And then, the famous story, and the one, and we still say this, Jim Nance and I and some of the old guys who still are around. Jack Lemmon, the legendary actor, always said that he would give one of his Oscars if he could make the cut and play on Sunday at Pebble Beach. He did it for like 30-something years, never played on Sunday. So he came to the final 18, on the 18th hole on Saturday with the chance to make the cut to play on Sunday. And he gets up on 18 and he hooks the ball right on the rocks in the beach there at the Pacific Ocean. And Pat Summerall says, lemon on the rocks. And Phil Harris says, sounds like one of my drinks, Pat. And Ken Venturi, which I've always thought this is a great thing to be known as, he looked at Phil and he's on the air and he said, Phil, you're a legendary drinker, which I always thought that's a good thing to be known as. You're a legendary drinker. I've always wanted to ask you, Phil, what is your favorite drink? And he said, Pat and Kenny, the next one.
So you covered the 86 Masters, and I know you were sitting at the left of Frank Chirkinian at that time, and he was a real laid back guy, you know.
Yeah, yeah. His nickname was the Ayatollah.
So tell us a little bit about when Nicholas is making that run and kind of your role in that.
Yeah, people ask me all the time, what's your favorite event you ever been a part of? You know, I got to produce Super Bowl 50, which was a big deal. Won an Emmy for that. Produced the 97 Masters. You know, there's a guy named Tiger Woods won that tournament, his first major and his first Masters. I'm not for sure what he did afterwards, but I think he did okay. Daytona 500, where Dale Earnhardt Sr. was the only time he won that race. And sadly, a few years later, he was killed on that track. Olympics, you know, a lot of the Masters, a lot of Tiger's career. But I always tell people, even though I didn't produce it, the 86 Masters was my favorite event of all time, because Jack Nicklaus came back at the age of 46 and won his 6th green jacket. So I always tell people, when I tell this story, golf is the hardest sport to do on TV. And people look at me and go, seriously? Because some of the best naps I get on Sunday afternoon is watching your golf tournaments on TV. And I used to kind of be offended by that, which I should have been. And they finally asked somebody, and they said, you got to remember, all week long we're getting emails and texts, phone calls, and bad news and this and that. We know when we turn on your golf on Saturday and Sunday, it's going to be nice weather, the birds are going to be chirping, it's going to be green, and that Yanni music that you guys play is so relaxing. We feel like we're getting massages. And so the 86 Masters, back then, we weren't on the air for all 18 holes. So by the time we came on the air, the leaders were like teeing off at 5 or 6. And Jack Nicklaus, right when we came on the air, and my job at the time was the replay producer, because you got to think what makes golf so hard. There's 18 stages. There's more than one ball. There's no numbers on their back. Like when Hunter Haas played on the PGA Tour, he didn't have a number on his back, so you had to make sure you knew who he was. And I can't very well have Jim Nantz, like other sports, when we go to commercial, they stop playing until we come back. So I can't very well have Jim Nantz lean over the tower and say, hey, Jordan, we're about 40 seconds back from a commercial, so wait till I give you the high sign to hit this putt. So you got to know how far it takes to walk from green to tee, who plays quickly, who plays slowly. And I'll give you a little hint. The hardest course we would do every year was Colonial, because it's an old traditional golf course. And I mean that in a complimentary way, you know, because if you go to any of these famous old golf courses around the world, because of equipment and stuff, they'd make the green and you walk 5 steps and you're on the tee box. And that's what Colonial, they try to get all these commercials in. So my job was to replay all the shots that were missing live and to get us on the air, off the air, and all our commercials in as an associate director. So right when we came on the air, Jack Nicklaus birdies the 8th hole. In the final group, about 45 minutes behind Jack, was Nick Price, who had set the course record the day before at Augusta, and Greg Norman. And in the group in front of them was Seve Ballesteros and Tom Kite. So I say to Frank, and we're sitting literally leg to leg. And like I said, Frank Chikinian's nickname, to tell you what kind of guy he was, his nickname was the Ayatollah. And he loved that nickname. For y'all don't know who the Ayatollah is, go look him up. Back in the 80s, he was a pretty well-known guy. Like I asked one of our young guys at CBS, do you know who the Ayatollah is? He goes, yeah, didn't he have something to do with the hostage guys over in Iran or something like that? I go, nah, yeah, okay. And you went to Notre Dame, huh? So we come on the air, Jack birdies 8. I look at Frank and I say, Frank, Jack just birdied 8. And Frank goes, don't want him. So Jack birdies 9. And I say, Frank, Jack just birdied 9. And he called me Buddha for some reason. And he said, Buddha, I don't want Jack Nicklaus. And he's also saying words to me. As a student at Abilene Christian, we didn't learn these words. We didn't have a class that these words were mentioned a lot at Abilene Christian. And so I said, okay. So Jack birdies, birdies 10. And I said, hey, Frank, Jack just birdied 10. And he said, Buddha, for the last time, do you understand me? And every other word is a swear word. And he's putting it in grammatical order, which I thought was genius in the first place. Buddha, I don't want Jack Nicklaus. I thought I taught you better than this. And he's pounding his fist and he's screaming and yelling at me. He says, I thought I taught you better than this. I don't want Jack Nicklaus. If you don't understand what drama is all about right now, I'm going to send you to drama school where you'll learn what drama is all about. For the last time, Buddha, don't mention Jack Nicklaus's name again to me. Jack Nicklaus means nothing in this golf tournament. I said, okay. So Jack birdies 11. And I tapped Frank on the leg and I said, hey, Frank, I know Jack means nothing in this golf tournament, but he's just birdied the 11th hole. And he looked at me and he said, cue it up, Buddha, let's get it on the air. And it was the greatest event I've ever been a part of, and to this day.
That's great. So, and your first Masters you produced yourself was Tiger's 97 event.
97.
And what do you remember about that event?
I remember Saturday morning, it was pouring down rain at Augusta, and I was standing outside, or standing right by the door of my office, and I was saying, you know, God, please don't let this rain and make us my first ever Masters have a rain delay and a rain fill. You know, I went to as much chapel as I could at Abilene Christian. You know, I went to church whenever I could at Abilene Christian. I try to live right, so please, God, don't let this rain. And I called my mom and said, Mom, will you pray? Because I knew she'd get through to him, to God about me. And all of a sudden it stopped. And then the other one, we do these openings. You know, Jim Nance voices it. You know, it's just beautiful pictures and beautiful, you know, scenics, you know, about this and that, and, you know, in Augusta National and all this. It's like 3.5 minutes. It's beautiful. So Jack Stevens, who was chairman of Augusta National at that time, and Nick Faldo, who was the defending champion, who had missed the cut, came driving through our TV compound. And Jack Stevens never came down, and he's one of my Mount Rushmore of people that I would put in a mountain with a picture that was an influence of my life. But he came down twice. That time, and he came down once and gave me a putter as a gift from the club. And he came down and I said, hey, Jack, would you like to see our opening tees? He goes, sure. So Nick Faldo and Jack walks up, and we show this, you know, Bobby Jones had a vision, Clifford Roberts, you know, and then we had all these great calls in the past, you know, maybe yes, sir, and, you know, in your life, have you ever seen anything, and all this sort of stuff. And we get done, and I'm thinking, man, this is beautiful. Jack's going to pat me on the back and say, you guys are the greatest. We're lucky to have CBS. And he always smoked. He took a drag off his cigarette, and he looked at me and goes, Lance, when are we going to get to live golf today? And I said, as soon as we come on the air, Jack, as soon as we come on the air. And for the first time ever, other than a rain delay, we showed live golf, second shots at the 5th hole at Augusta National, Tiger and Constantino Rocca. And I remember Jack Stevens called me Sunday morning and said, you've had such a great week. Your first time here. I want to invite you to the Champions Dinner after the tournament here at the club. It's only for members and their spouses, and Tiger and his family. So I thought it was a April Fool's deal or something. And I walked in, and there was all these green jackets and my navy blue jacket, and I sat at a table, and Tiger was there, and I've never really ever told that story, but that was one of the biggest thrills of my life, to be invited to that and be myself and Tiger and his family, only non-members of Augusta National, in that room. And it's still one of the great moments of my life. And to be there and be there in '97, and it was bigger than just a golf tournament. With Tiger winning at Augusta, and what it meant to society and a lot of things. Not that I had anything to do with it, but it was really something to be able to say that you were blessed enough to be a part of that.
Yeah, and how is you've known Tiger, I guess, almost his entire adult life. How has he changed over the years, or has he? Is he the same guy as he was?
I think he changed. I think he's become kind of a spokesman for the tour. I'm kind of surprised I haven't heard from him about the live stuff, that what's going on with the tour and live, but that's another subject for another night. But
we'll probably talk about it tonight.
Okay. What I always said, people ask me all the time about what kind of guy is Tiger. And I said, here's how I judge him. If he tells you he's going to do an interview at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he's going to give you 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, he's there right at 9 o'clock. You put a mic on him, you sit down and say, good morning, Tiger. Good morning, Lance. When you get done, you say, thank you, Tiger. Thank you, Lance. And he gets up and walks out. As I tell people, I have guys I'm going to dinner with later that night that are out practicing, might not show up at all, or might show up an hour later, and I go, where you guys been? Well, we were practicing. I said, well, what do you think about this crew and everything that we have set up and all that? You think we're just waiting on you guys? So, I don't say that Tiger's a dear friend of mine, but I respect him for being professional enough to be there on time and to, take care of his obligation.
Yeah. So who is harder to work for, Augusta National or Jack Nicklaus?
I think they're both easy to work for, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Matter of fact, I'll tell you a story about Jack Nicklaus. It was back in like October, November, right here in this room. Stage was a little bit pushed up. It was a YPO thing. They brought in Jack Nicklaus to be interviewed. And they asked me, because I feel very close to Jack and Barbara, part of his captain's club there at Muirfield Village, and the family. Bobby O'Leary, who's one of their grandsons, lives here in town, went to TCU. And Jack was here, and they asked me to be the guy to interview Jack. So Jack was having a great time. We're sitting here, and we've been doing this for about 45 minutes, about a group about the size of this. And I said to Jack, I have to ask you one more question. And he looked at me and he goes, Lance, I'm 82 years old. I'm at the age where I have to go to the bathroom. And I have to go right now. He gets up, puts his mic on the chair, just like what Judd and I are doing, walks down the stairs, walks into the men's bathroom, comes back, sits down and goes, whew, I needed to do that. That's great. And he goes, I'm having a great time. If you guys want to keep going, let's keep going. And everybody clapped, and we did another 45 minutes, nearly 2 hours with Jack Nicklaus. But it all started because he had to go to the bathroom. I love Jack and Barbara they're like parents. And Augusta National, just like anything else, they have rules, just like the NFL does, just like any other professional sports, PJ Tour. And, one thing great about Augusta National, they don't worry, they want to be, and this is something to think about in any business. They want to do what's best, not only for the golfers, but for the fans, the patrons, television, whatever makes the Masters Golf Tournament look great and be great. They're so far ahead and advanced at most organizations because they're not worrying about, as a lot of people have to, budgets and stuff. They worry about putting on and I forget about sporting event. They want to put on the greatest event there is on this planet. And I think they do most of the time.
So I guess the flip side of that is who's the hardest to work with or control, I guess you should say, Faraday or McCord?
John Feinstein just came out with a book about David Faraday, if you want to read it. It's a very interesting book. David Faraday and Gary McCord, I had two rules for both of them. Every day I would say this to them. When they walk into my office, I'd say, I got two things for you guys to do for me. Don't get fired today, and don't get me fired today. Other than that, I don't care what you do. And I remember telling John Feinstein when he was interviewing me about Faraday in the book, he said, what was the hardest part about working with Faraday? And I said, Faraday was great. I said, my biggest concern with Faraday, if he knew what city we were in, what golf course we were having the tournament, and what time we went on the air. When I would see him every Saturday and Sunday, I knew we were fine, because I didn't really care if he knew who was playing in the golf tournament, because he's so clever and so good and so funny that he would figure it out. But I just wanted to make sure he knew what golf course, what city, and what time we went on the air. That's all I cared. We did a commercial once, a promo for golf at CBS, and it was all our announcers doing a confessional. And they would show the confessional box, and they'd have a little quick thing. Like Jim Nance said, Father, what has all the other guys been saying, and did anybody talk about me? In Jim Nance fashion. Faraday said, Father, I got a confession. Once in Greensboro, I did the whole show in Lance's office. I never went out on the golf course, which I'm in a truck. He has a microphone. He could have done that every show. I wouldn't have known. But I would not doubt that he did a couple tournaments sitting in our office. But I've said this many times. I was fortunate to work with legends in this industry, like Pat, like Jim Nance, like Dick Enberg, Brent Musburger, Phyllis George, Tracy Wilson now, Leslie Visser, Andrea Joyce, Bill Raftery, and Enberg and Deerdorf and all those guys. And, John Madden was like a father to me, and Gary McCord and David Faraday. I don't think in my lifetime there will ever be another three announcers like those three, because they looked at life differently than most people. Like I always said, John Madden could make three Gatorade buckets look interesting. With the telestrator, there's the daddy Gatorade, there's the mama Gatorade, and there's the baby Gatorade, and then they, blue, green, and all that. And I mean, people don't think that way, and that's the way McCord and Faraday did.
Yeah. So you covered, you mentioned Super Bowl 50, but you also did the Super Bowl where the lights went out.
I did.
So, and that wasn't your fault?
No, I didn't, it was Beyonce's. It really wasn't her either, but they turned all the lights off when she went on stage at halftime. And then when they turned it on, the computer thought it was a surge, and they shut the whole Superdome down. And I said they should have just kept Beyonce there and just plugged the generator in their hips, and they would have been fine.
So what's it like producing a show without a power?
Well, I knew, somebody asked me, how did you know something was going on? And I said, all of a sudden Jim Nance and Phil Simms weren't talking, so I knew there was something wrong. And then the only guy that had a microphone that was working was Steve Tasker, and he was a former football player, should be in the Hall of Fame for a specialty teams player, but he wasn't trained to do this. And it wasn't like golf where I could say to somebody, well, throw us, let's now go to the 2016 Charles Schwab Challenge, third round, here's so-and-so at 15. We had nothing. We had a video because earlier that year in the old Candlestick Park, it was the 49ers and the Ravens. their lights went out in a Monday night football game. So we had that. We did a highlight film. Not that I remember exactly how long we were blacked out, but it was 34 minutes and 11 seconds. And then we went to commercial. So we went to 2 commercial, so that's 4 minutes, until our head of sales at CBS Corporation came in our truck and said, Lance, you can't do any more commercials. Because those commercials were sold for in-game action. So you've just spent $20 million that we're gonna have to refund because of what you just done. And I remember what happens, our pregame show, our Today show, our NFL Today guys, they do a first segment and then they throw it to the concert. And then they go off until the end of the game. Well, we're trying to scramble to get them back. And I remember trying to get these guys back because I had Steve Tasker and he didn't know what to say anymore. You know, he basically, there's a great Saturday Night Live skit that they show on this where, you know, the guy's playing, you know, James Brown throws it down to Steve Tasker, and Steve Tasker says, well, from the last time you threw it down here, JB, I have nothing new to tell you, so don't throw it back to me. And then back to you, JB. Okay, well, coming up later, 2 broke girls. It's on CBS, they're broke, and they're 2 girls. All right, back down to Steve Tasker. And then, you know, they don't see Steve Tasker, JB, do not throw it. And then, you know, somebody says something, and then, you know, they said, you got to tell us the truth, JB. And he goes, well, I never seen the show 2 Broke Girls. I've seen broke girls, but they don't look like the girls on 2 Broke Girls. And then the lights came on, and it ended up being one of the great games because of social media. And I'm not a social media fan at all, but because of social media, the ratings, because Baltimore had run back the opening kickoff in the second half, and it was a blowout. But because of social media and what was going on, the ratings started going crazy. And then the 49ers came back and had a chance to win the game in the last play of the game in the end zone. So it was one of the highest rated Super Bowls ever. But at halftime, the ratings after Beyonce went south. I wasn't a producer, but I was a replay producer for the Janet Jackson Super Bowl, if you remember that, with Justin Timberlake and Miss Jackson, if you're nasty. And I wasn't really interested in Snoop Dogg or Nelly or that at halftime, so I went to the restroom, I came back, I'm laying there, I'm sitting in my chair, and we have probably 50 TV monitors. And what I always explain to people, we might have 130 cameras at the Super Bowl, and we might only use 60 of them, but every camera, no matter what, is always working. You know, just like golf tournament, every camera is working, even though they might not get on the air. So I'm just kind of, have my headset on, kind of only person in the room, kind of just relaxing, and all of a sudden, Justin Timberlake does that to Janet Jackson. And I say kind of to myself, because nobody was around me, the headset's on, I said, holy smokes, did Janet Jackson's boob just fall out of her dress? And with that, I got about 30 different angles of that shot, because all the cameras and all the videotape guys, yeah, you can't wait till you see this. And I go, take it down in case somebody misses a button and we actually punch it up again on TV. So that, you know, maybe that's a pattern. I have disasters at the Super Bowl.
So when you're producing it, now I've been in the truck, and I think a lot of us have been in the truck with you at Colonial. First of all, you know, Lance is, as I jokingly said in our deal, one of Fort Worth's greatest ambassadors, but he really has shown Fort Worth over the years. Why is that so special to you? I always laugh because they'll be in, you know, Iowa or John Deere Classic, and they'll say, oh, here's such and such. He finished third at the 1996 Charles Schwab Challenge at Colonial in Fort Worth, Texas, and that's the only tournament that get mentioned like that. So, and you've shown a lot of shots over the years of TCU and Fort Worth and stockyards and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I get kind of read by guys because, you know, I always am pushing Fort Worth. You know, a lot of people don't know, when we do the Charles Schwab tournament here, or when we do any tournament, we go to 233 countries around the world. And that starts on Thursday afternoon when we do Golf Channel all the way until we give the plaid jacket away. And we do that every week. And, you know, Jim Nance loves Fort Worth also. And Ian Baker Finch, one of our announcers, won this tournament many years ago. The last guy to ever go wire to wire to win. And, you know, I grew up here. My dad grew up here. I'm very proud, you know, to be a Fort Worth guy, a native of Fort Worth. You know, I remember years ago, one of the first things I got to produce was the Cotton Bowl. And we go to the big kickoff luncheon at the Cotton Bowl. It's like 2,000 people. And I'm sitting there, and our two announcers get up, and they talk about being at the Cotton Bowl. And they sit down. Our main announcer just gets up for a minute and sits down. And I said to him later, I said, you know, if I would have been me, I'd have said, you know, you're in great hands today in this week because one of your own is producing this game. And he grew up watching this game. And he was proud of doing this. And I asked him that. And he said, nobody cares. And it was a great lesson for me because you only get a few moments in your life to brag about something or someone. And I was fortunate for nearly 30 years to be in charge of golf at CBS, to not only get to brag about Colonial and what it represents and the tradition. You know, we have Marty Leonard here today, what Marvin Leonard did to bring golf to the Southwest, you know, and what they did, and Ben Hogan. And, you know, I was fortunate enough to go to church with Byron Nelson for many years, and his involvement with Abilene Christian. And, you know, I love Fort Worth, and I feel like I would be letting down our mayor and our people and our citizens of Fort Worth if I didn't have those, 20-something hours on Golf Channel and CBS to be able to brag about our city. And not only show, you know, I remember Elliot Garsick, a great friend, when we were the Fort Worth Invitational. He called me up and said, the Amon Carter Foundation has given us money. And so we put it in the contract that they can bring people to the trucks. And you'll show the museum district. And I said, Elliot, why did you put that in a contract? Because you guys can come to the truck anytime you want to, and you know every year we show the museum district. And so why would you do it? He goes, well, we just want to make it official. I said, well, not only do we show the museum district, you know, we finally took away the blimp, a little unknown story, because you know, we're in May and we have thunderstorms. And if there's any thunderstorms within the, you know, from the Arizona border to the Tennessee border, anywhere around, the blimp won't fly. And please don't say that to anybody because I'm just kidding, but that's true. And so we ended up getting a fixed wing camera, took away really our production, where I wanted to make sure our camera could show downtown Fort Worth, where we could show TCU. You know, there was a young lady who called me up years ago and said, I'm an Abilene Christian graduate. I know you are. We just got the white rhinos at the Fort Worth Zoo. Would you mind showing them? And I went, sure. And so every year we take the plane over and show the zoo. We only do that at one other zoo because Jack Hanna is the very next week at the Columbus Zoo, and he brings animals actually to our TV compound, which I've always thought it would be fun to call Jack up and say, hey, Jack Nicholas, I don't think this is a problem, but a cheetah just got loose in our TV compound. But, you know, I'm proud to be a guy from Fort Worth. I hammer it. You know, Chuck Shear is a great friend, who's former tournament chairman at the tournament and also president of the club. Every once in a while will text me and go, it took 35 minutes for you guys mentioned Colonial Fort Worth or something in your telecast this week in Akron, Ohio. And so, you know, I'm just proud to be able to be a part of Fort Worth. I've said anytime they need me, anytime the city needs me or anything like that, just give me a call and I'll be there because I love being a supporter of this town. I think we're so fortunate to be able to live in this city, to have leaders like we do in this city, and to be able to share this city with a lot of people and to be able to showcase how special we are here in Fort Worth every time we get to do the Colonial.
My next question is going to be, what's the difference between a TV producer and a lawyer? But your Elliot Garsick story answered that. You were asked, or you were in Tin Cup.
I was.
And you told me, I think Melissa's, she's seen the movie, but she hadn't seen you in it because she blinked, right?
No, I'm in it. No. And I'm going to tell you right now, don't confuse me with Kevin Costner. He's the other good-looking guy in the movie. Matter of fact, people ask, how'd you guys get in that movie? When Ron Shelton, the director, famous director, did Bull Durham, White Men Can't Jump, and movies like that, and then Gary Foster, the first time I met Gary Foster, the producer of the movie, I said to him, have you ever done any other movies in Hollywood? And he said, yeah, the last movie I did, Lance, you might have seen it, called Sleepless in Seattle. I go, I'm not for sure. Did that come out? I'm not for sure where that and who was in that movie again? But Costner didn't know how to play golf. So they hired Gary McCord and Peter Costas to teach Kevin how to play golf. So he would fly out with Ron Shelton and Gary Foster, and they would do golf lessons. And then they'd come sit in our truck. And so they thought it was fascinating what we did in the truck, so they went and wrote us into the movie. And so if I could do this, and I hope nobody gets offended by this, a lot of people have asked me, why haven't you been in any more movies? And I've been in a couple of TV shows, but I'm tired of playing myself. I'm looking for a more interesting role. And I thought I was going to be James Bond, but Daniel Craig got that. And I don't drink martinis. I drink unsweetened iced tea. So that wasn't that exciting. But, if you remember Leonardo DiCaprio, when he did the movie Titanic, they interviewed him and he said, I'm burnt out in Hollywood. I'm going to take a year off. And so I kind of feel like my good friend Leo, as we call him in Hollywood, I kind of feel that way. I'm kind of burnt out in the movie industry since 1998 when that movie was on. But that movie's on all the time. And I actually have people stop me, and this is a true story. Aren't you the guy in Tin Cup? And then I've actually had people say, aren't you the guy in Tin Cup? I can tell by your voice. And I go, how many times have you watched that crapping movie if you can do that? But I'm going to ask you all to do me one favor. I'm not soliciting money, but I get a quarter of a penny for every rental of the movie Tin Cup. And I get a half a penny for every time they sell the movie Tin Cup. And so I'm trying to retire off the residuals in the next 40 or 50 years, okay? So tonight, tomorrow, will you please go either rent it or buy it just to help out our retirement fund for myself and my family. And if you get the director's cut, don't be embarrassed between the love scene between Renee Russo and I in the movie. And she said she was only acting. But I need you to help me with that, to get my good that. And by the way, the year the movie came out, I was the Young Alumni of the Year at Abilene Christian. And about halfway through the movie at the premiere in Los Angeles, my wife leaned over and said, boy, Abilene Christian is going to be really proud of their Young Alumni of the Year being in this movie.
So I know you've had a lot of brushes with Hollywood greatness. One of my favorite stories is your Larry David story. You and I share a love for Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David. So tell us your Larry David story.
Well, I don't know how funny it is, but Larry David and I I was at Bel Air Country Club. Our youngest daughter went to University of Oklahoma, was a cheerleader, and we're very close to the athletic department at University of Oklahoma, and they were playing UCLA. So I'm fortunate enough to be a member at Bel Air Country Club, and so the athletic director, Joe Castiglio, Zach Selman, who's now the athletic director at Mississippi State, and a couple other people were out with us, and we invited them to come to lunch at Bel Air Country Club. So we're sitting at this table, and I go in to go to the restroom, and in the next stall is Larry David. And I'm a huge Larry David fan, but I didn't say anything to him. He gets done, he walks behind me, I get done, I go to wash my hands, and Larry David walks out and then opens the door back to me and goes, "Don't tell anybody I didn't wash my hands. I wear 2 golf gloves." I went, "Okay, Mr. David, yeah, sure, whatever." I thought that was bizarre. And then I introduced myself and said, "I know you do a lot of lessons with Gary McCord, Peter Costa." They go, yeah. So I walk out, and Doc Rivers, the basketball coach, is a good friend. His daughter is getting married to Seth Curry's brother. And so Dale Curry was there, so Doc goes, "Hey, Lance, what are you doing out here?" And I said, "We're here for the Oklahoma game." And he goes, "Let me introduce you. Here's Dale Curry." And then another guy, Skip Brunson, who was the right-hand guy for Steve Wynn, who they've been friends for years. And he said, and Larry goes, "I just met Lance in the bathroom," which I thought was an interesting thing. So they go off and play golf. They come back. We're getting in the car. Larry David comes up. I have to ask him, "How'd you play, Larry?" And he sits down and he starts for the next 20 minutes telling me everything about his golf game. And I leaned over to my wife and I said, "Melissa, I think we're in the middle of a Curb Your Enthusiasm right now." I mean, it was exactly the way you see him on TV.
So you have been around some of the greats. I think Frank Chirkinian, certainly, Pat Summerall, Jack Nicklaus, Tiger, I don't know who else, John Madden, all these names you've been. What is the one kind of common thread you see of, you've been around both President Bushes a lot. I know that you have a close relationship with certainly 41 and 43 as well. So what is that common thread that you see that runs through all of those great guys and great people?
Well, I think first thing, the way they treat people. Jim Nance tells a great story. 41 calls Jim Nance up a few years ago and says, "Hey, Jimmy, can you do me a favor?" And as Jim Nance always says, once I hear, "Can you do me a favor?" it's going to be the greatest gift I've ever gotten. He says, "President Clinton's coming up to Kennebunkport for the first time, and would you please come up and maybe be here in case I need something, in case the conversation doesn't keep going." And 2 former presidents. So he says to Jim, "You might want to bring somebody up here that might enjoy doing that." So he calls Tom Brady. And that was when he was dating Bridget Moynihan's, and Bill Belichick gives him a day off. They helicopter into Kennebunkport. And Jim and Brady leave this lobster place where you go eat lobster, rolls with the president and Mrs. Bush. And Jim looks at Brady, and here they are in the heart of New England Patriot country. And people are all clamoring because they want to see the 2 presidents. They're not even paying attention. Forget about Jim Nance. They're not even paying attention to Tom Brady. And Bridget Moynihan's who's on Blue Bloods. And Jim says to Tom, "Watch how these 2 guys handle this." And they come out, and they don't stop, but everybody, and I've been down this road with them, and I've seen it, and I've experienced it, that you feel like, even though it might be 3 seconds, it might be 4 seconds, you feel like that you had a moment with them, and they never seemed rushed. I always said every time I left 41 or 43 or their spouses, I always said I need to be a better person, because if these people can be the way they are, and I'm not talking about politics, I'm just talking about how a person is. I said, I got to be a better person. And that's the way I think they have, how they treat people, how they think about things, how their minds are always working. What's best for the next stop, and being around John Madden and being around Dick Vermeil and all these great coaches I've been fortunate enough to be around. Gary Patterson, that spent a lot of time with him. How they handle things and how they look at things and how they focus on certain things, it's amazing. And it's not amazing, really, why they're so great and why they're so successful, because just how they do things and how they handle people and how they, John Madden, if I was going to meet him tonight here at dinner and I saw him in the afternoon, I'd say, I'll see you tonight, John. And his question was always, how will I know you? And he always wanted to have you have a decent, smart answer instead of like, what are you talking about? You know who I am. He goes, no, how will I know you? And he wants you to think and have your brain work. And I think just how they handle people is the greatest thing that I've noticed from these people, how they deal with people and how they handle people and how they're always thinking on what we can do to be better.
So I'm going to open it up to the crowd if y'all have questions as well. I do want to ask Lance kind of the loaded question for the night is what conference is Abilene Christian in? No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
And we're starting a new Division I football conference, UAC. It will also be online starting this year.
We can't wait.
We're also purple and white.
Where do you think the Live PGA Tour thing is headed? And does Jay Monahan even know?
Has anything gone on with that? It's been kind of out of the story the last few months. I haven't been around much. I haven't been paying much attention to what's going on, getting ready for the U.S. Open.
I did learn from Amanda Balionis on the Netflix show that a par is a par and that there's a cut. I learned that from that show.
Yes, and Amanda knows that well. I have always thought, and I'm not an expert, and I don't know anything more than you know, other than what I read, and obviously most of the PGA Tour players know that too, what they read now. But it's just like any business. There's competition. Just like if you work for Ford or General Motors, you're in competition. And so I think the Live Tour came along and they were competing against the PGA Tour, which they had not had competition in a while. I think on the PGA Tour side, they have rules. If you want to be a member of the PGA Tour, you go by these rules. And if you don't, then you're going to face consequences. And so, it's interesting to hear professional athletes who play on a team talk about being paid and how these guys are going to Live Tour for all this money. And, they say, hey, I'm loyal to the Dallas Cowboys until my contract's up. And then if the Green Bay Packers give me more money, then I'm going to be loyal to the Green Bay Packers. And, golf is an individual sport. They're independent contractors. So they should be able to play anywhere they want to. But if you're a member of the PGA Tour or the European Tour, or the Asian Tour, or whatever tour, and you have a rule, you need to stand by it. I just hope for the good of the game, and there's a lot of smart people, Jimmy Dunn, Ed Hurdley, great friends, and genius of people. I just hope that they get it all worked out and we can actually turn on live at the U.S. Open at LA Country Club next year or whenever it is, and we don't have to hear about the Live Tour and the PGA Tour and the DP Tour and all that. We just hear about how they're going to play LA Country Club and how they're going to do it. And I'm speaking as a golf fan, so that's what I'm hoping.
Do we have any questions from the crowd? Anybody want?
You could tell these guys, I don't know if everybody was at the Ford Club a few months ago, on the call on Tiger on 16 in 05.
05. If you remember, Tiger hits that shot and the ball stops on the edge of the cup, and then it's a great Nike commercial and it rolls in the deal. So when we're in the truck, when we go to the 16th hole, my job is to now start thinking about where we're gonna go next, like 2 or 3 steps ahead. So I'm not even watching what have on the air, except maybe put a graphic in or put this in or whatever, and I'm talking to the announcers. So our director, Steve Milton's job is to punch around the cameras. Then we have the guy that I was telling, Jim Rickoff, who he does what I did for Frank, so he's doing all the replays. So all of a sudden Tiger hits the shot, I'm not even watching, I'm thinking, do we go to 18? Or what's gonna happen, this ball could end up in the bunker, it could end up in the water, or whatever it is, or we're gonna stay here and see what Tiger does. So Tiger hits the shot, the ball rolls, it stops on the edge of the hole, and it falls in. And Jim Rickoff hits me in the shoulder so hard, I look at him and I go, what is wrong? He goes, that's the greatest shot I've ever seen ever in my life. And I look over at our director, Steve Milton, and he goes, Lance, I'm sorry I missed it. And I go, what do you mean you missed it? And Frank Chikinian's line was, there's nothing more boring than watching a stationary ball just sit on the green or in the fairway. And for whatever reason, our switcher wasn't fast enough to punch the button, because Steve would have been right. He should have gone to Tiger's reaction after he hit the shot, and instead for that snap of your finger second, the switcher was slow to switch it, and the ball rose in to the hole. And we get one of the greatest shots. Also, our camera operators always get these people that are inventing things, and they're asking our technicians to use it. So this guy out of New Jersey, our camera operator, Bob Wishney, who was also our cart camera operator in football, some guy in New Jersey invented a stabilizer on his 50-to-1 lens. So the bigger the lens are, the closer you get to the subject, the more shaking you're gonna get. So he put this stabilizer on, unbeknownst to any of us. So as more he kept pushing into the ball, the more it's kept steady instead of bouncing up and down like it should have done. And then the ball went in, one of the greatest things for Nike. And if you watch it again, first off, Vern Lundquist's call about, in your life, have you ever seen anything like this? And then Tiger's reaction, and he and Steve Williams are missing high fives all over up and down the course. And then there's 2 great, and it's hard to find, but the head of the Royal and Ancient Golf Club at St. Andrews is one of the rules officials at hole, Peter Dawson. Now he's in charge of the Olympics. And he is standing there, the place is going crazy, and he's just standing at attention, like you'd see one of the guards at Buckingham Palace, just standing at attention, never moving, never reaction. And then on the other side, and the patrons that are going crazy, there's 2 pretty big husky guys, one with a yellow shirt on, one with a blue shirt on, and they're all jumping up and down, and then they finally looked at each other and kind of, one of that hesitant deal, and then they just started hugging each other and jumping up and down. So, it's one of those shots that you just afterwards say, thank you, Lord, for helping us not miss that. And that story took, a minute or 2. That was about snap of a finger, how fast that all happened. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How do we get the caddy race back at Colonial?
That's something that you talk to the PGA Tour in Ponte Vedra, Florida. I think it's area code 904. They call that office.
We'll bring it back.
Yeah, Yes, sir.
How do you get the phone number to call the network to report a rules violation?
That's interesting. You find that out, let me know. I'd like to know that myself. I mean, if I tell you right now, and I'm in the business, if I called Colonial during the final round of the tournament and said, I'd like to talk to the PGA Tour, I'd imagine, and I don't mean this as a derogatory thing, I imagine the operator would go, I have no idea what you're talking about, sir. And I'd get switched about 15 different places. And so I always have been interested to know how people find that out and how they know it. And it's honestly a pain in our butt when that happens, because now the PGA Tour comes down to our truck and we have to stop a couple of our videotape machines to go back and find something that happened. So if you find that out, give me a call, 817-680-9000.
That was 2013 when Tiger when he hit the stick and then dropped 3 feet back or whatever, right?
Yeah. We had 2 rules official in our truck. We had Tom Laws, Total Loss, if any of you know him by that name, who's known as one of the foremost rules officials in the world, and Mike Holbert, who played on the tour for many, many years, very successful. The minute Tiger said I took 3 feet back, they both said, we got a problem, boys. And then, because Tiger said that to Tom Rinaldi, that he did that, and the minute he said it, we have a problem. And that was really not a very good night, because we're trying to figure out what they're gonna do, and then Saturday, what they were gonna do, and then what happened. We also had the thing where Dustin Johnson was grounding his club in the sand at Whistling Strait when he was leading it by 2, and it was considered everything, that whole golf course is sand, and every piece of sand was considered a bunker. And that's another one. Tom Loss leaned over and said, Pars, you got a problem right now. You better call the PGA of America before he signs the scorecard. So you don't want that. You don't want to be a part of the action. You want to cover the action. Maybe one more question? Well, Judd, thank you. I hope we didn't go too long. Mayor, once again, David, thank you guys for being here. Marty, I tell you, Marty Leonard, Mayor Moncrief and Rosie, and Sandra Lusky, most of you know Sandra Lusky, they would come and sit in the back of us on Saturday and Sunday when we would come on the air back in the day at Colonial. And I remember saying to our front row guys, I said, boys, girls, we better not screw this opening up, because we got the mayor, the first lady, the daughter of the guy who started this place, and Sandra Lusky, who we should listen to anytime she says anything. And so, but it was always great to have you there, Marty, and you were always welcome. I got to meet Mr. Hogan 2 or 3 times. Ken Venturi considered Ben Hogan and Byron Nelson like fathers to him, and I've heard a lot of great stories about Mr. Hogan. I even as a kid got to see him play in competition, and it's one of my big thrills of my life. And then to be able to be a part of Colonial and that golf tournament, to celebrate Ben Hogan and his great career, and then to hear about, like this year, the U.S. Open. Mr. Hogan always claimed he won 5 U.S. Opens because he has the medal for them instead of 4, and I think he's won 5, even though it might not have been called that. But thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Judd, for having me in the Hogan Foundation. I hope I didn't bore you too much. And, it was just an honor to be here. This is like the 6th time in my life, and I grew up in Colleyville, that I've ever been to Shady Oaks. And so anytime I have a chance to come here, I always have to look at the GPS to get here. So, but it's a thrill to always be here. Robert, once again, thank you for what you did for the Hogan Foundation, and you have a great man leading it now in Judd. So thank you so much, everyone.